New videos every day.
Gwen is an author, and she is author of the book Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher. Today we're going to talk more about her book. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, just to start off, can you just maybe talk about the title of the book? Describing yourself as an RX drug pusher. Why would you do that? Why would you include that in the title of your book?
Well, first of all, because I wanted people to understand exactly what pharmaceutical reps do. And I think that that's a very poignant way of putting it, because pharmaceutical reps are in the business of selling drugs. And so therefore, they are pushing pharmaceuticals in the same manner that people on the streets are pushing illicit drugs. That means they're doing it for profit and without concern about what happens to the individuals taking them. So that was the reason why I put that in that manner. And Confessions, because I am personally taking responsibility for my contributions in that industry and recognizing that even though I was told that my job was a job of education, that my job was in fact a job that was disseminating marketing information and helping to pigeonhole providers into writing prescriptions for products that would make my portfolio grow. So that being said, my job was not an educational job. My job was to influence providers of healthcare to write products that I was selling. Mm-hmm. And I did that by a vast majority of means, but primarily through bribery.
Wow. So we'll have you talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what really stood out to me, and I think it's very telling that you have, essentially compared yourself to a drug dealer. And I think what really stood out to me the most when I saw the title of this book was just within this title, Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher, we get the sensation that there is incentive to push the drugs. The incentive is not on providing medications with the intention of helping people, but really there is a push to sell these drugs, as you mentioned already, a profit motivation. And you spoke a little bit about why you've called it Confessions. So I guess maybe if you want to just give us some stories about what you experienced.
I'd really like to comment further on that, though, because really it's important that people understand there's a huge misconception about what the pharmaceutical industry does and who they are beholden to. Mm-hmm. Because the pharmaceutical industry is not in the business of health and healing. That's not why they are manufacturing drugs. They're in the business of symptoms, maintenance, and disease management. That's what makes them money. That's what's profitable. Mm-hmm. Curing disease is not profitable. So there are a number of cures for various diseases that have been discovered, and then they're bought out by the pharmaceutical industry, or the companies are sued to keep these remedies off of the market because they interfere with drug profits. What people need to really be aware of is that this is not an altruistic business. We're not talking about, CEOs that go to their companies every day that are philanthropists that are trying to heal the world. That's a very unrealistic picture of people to have of what a pharmaceutical industry is about or what they do. Mm-hmm. This industry is beholden to stockholders. They have a legal obligation to consider the stockholders above and beyond the consumer. So if you are aware of that, that makes it a lot more comprehensible as to why they would put drugs on the market that could harm people but were financially beneficial to their stockholders. And that's the point I want to drive home to people. If you're depending on drugs to heal you, you are placing your eggs in the wrong basket.
So I just want to back up a second. So you just said there is a legal obligation to prioritize profits.
Absolutely.
Over any obligation or concern of health of the patient.
There is a legal liability to the stockholders, not to the consumers.
Okay.
So they have to do things in the best interest of the stockholders, not in the best interest of the consumer.
So give us maybe a little snapshot, a day in the life of Gwen Olson, the RX drug pusher.
Well, first of all, it feels like a lifetime and another life ago. So it's very interesting. I can't even imagine the person that I was when I was in that position. But I was extremely effective, and I was also very successful. I worked in the top 3% of any company that I ever worked for. I was in the top 3% of their sales force. I went on all of the paid-for vacations to Hawaii, and I made all the big bonuses, and I had all of the nice perks that go with being a successful pharmaceutical rep. I had a 6-figure salary. I had all kinds of things that I wasn't willing to walk away from quickly, but over a period of time realized that I had to get out. And a day in the life of a pharmaceutical rep might start, early in the morning. I would be at a grand rounds, for example, to perhaps be with psychiatrists as they're getting grand rounds, or for students that are studying in the hospital environment. Mm-hmm. I was a hospital rep, and I was a specialty rep for the vast majority of my career. So there are reps that just call in general practitioners, but there are also reps that are in the hospital environment that have more responsibility. And that's what I was. I was one of the reps that helped teach residents. So I would go, perhaps start my day at 6:30 in the morning. I would hit a grand rounds at a hospital. And in order to be able to be there and to display my products and to talk to the doctors after the grand rounds, I would have to take food. So I would take something for breakfast, and generally drinks. And so you have to haul all that stuff in, or you have to have it catered in. And then you have to feed all of the residents and feed all of the doctors that come after that meeting, and hope to get maybe a 1 or 2 minute, opportunity to talk with them. Say after that was over, I might go out then and start calling on doctors that were in offices or going to other hospitals. And then I would make rounds. I was supposed to make 8 to 10 calls in a day. Almost invariably, every lunch appointment or every breakfast appointment, I had to carry in food. That had become one of the things that was just almost a standard. You were not only competing with the other representatives that were selling other drugs, we were competing with the other representative based on where they were buying their food and what kind of stuff they were dragging in. So, like the Pfizer rep brought in Olive Garden yesterday. So, so I had to go and compete and bring in something else from a better Italian restaurant or whatever, Right. But that was the way that I was allowed to gain access to physicians. Most of those were either appointments, or there were designated times that those individuals would see reps. And often I would spend hours sitting in a waiting room, just waiting to actually see what they called high volume prescribers, or doctors that were difficult to see. Sometimes, though, I got very smart about the whole thing and would just get backdoor privileges into offices, because I knew that it would upset the patients who would see me parade in and get back to see the doctor very quickly, obviously because I had all my goodies and my food and all my stuff, so the receptionist would let me right back while other patients had been waiting. So I got a large majority of my doctors that had offices to let me in the back door, so that I didn't even have to wait, and I didn't even have to make myself known to the patients that I was there. So I made sure that part of my job and my responsibilities as a rep was to do data gathering, to find out what organizations that my doctors belonged to, what churches they went to, what clubs they worked out in, what their favorite foods were, what their favorite restaurants were, how many children they had, where they attended school. All of that database then I utilized to manipulate and to befriend my doctors and to provide things for them that I knew would make me one of their favorite reps. And a lot of people say, well, I don't think that reps have any influence on what doctors do. Or doctors themselves will even say, well, I see reps, but reps don't influence what I do or what I prescribe. And the truth is that psychology works in a way that, and everyone that is in the industry knows this and in marketing knows this, that when you do nice things for people, people want to do nice things back for you. When you're supportive of people, people want to be supportive of you. And doctors are people, just like everybody else. So we also go through extensive training, at least I did with the companies that I worked for, where you can do psychological profiling and personality profiling of physicians so that you know best how to approach them. If they're a driver, then you let them take the main role of the conversation and let them do the driving of the circumstance. And you suggest information to them that makes them think they thought of it first by asking them questions. If they're an analytical, you make sure that you present information to them that contains clinical data, or it's, out of a journal or one of their peer-reviewed journals. But there's different ways to approach different individuals. But the bottom line was that I was supposed to influence those people to do what I wanted them to do.
And these manipulation tactics, these are things that you were trained in how to do, that you were told to do by the pharmaceutical industry, or that you kind of realized yourself or came up with yourself?
Well, I'd probably have to give some of the credit for my feminine wiles to my mother, but I can actually say that my ability to bribe and my ability to minimize and my ability to influence physicians psychologically was definitely something that was part of my training. And it was something that I did ongoing throughout my career. Each time that pharmaceutical reps get together in a meeting, they do what are called knee-to-knees and toe-to-toes, where one group of reps plays the doctor and the other group of reps will play the representative. And then they go over objections that they have heard in the field, the objections that a doctor brings up about a drug. And then we practice in groups verbatim handling that objection.
What are some examples of those objections, if you...
Oh, for example, I remember one of the things that I used to be told frequently was that, that drug causes my patient to gain weight. Some of my patients gain up to 100 pounds on that drug. Well, then the way you would minimize that would be, well, would you rather have a crazy patient or would you rather have a fat patient? Because what you're doing is you're putting the onus back on the physician to say, well, I'm minimizing that weight gain because I'm getting this other benefit. But I would do it the opposite with my competition. Say, for example, because this was what happened, is my competitor was the one actually that caused the weight gain severely. So what I did is I would go in and the doctor then would say, well, I'd rather have a fat patient than a crazy patient, absolutely parroting what the rep had been told to tell them. And so what I did is I went to a local grocery store, got just 10 pounds of fat from the butcher and put it in a bag and took it in on my calls. And while I was standing there talking in the hallway to the doctor, I would hand the bag of fat to him. Of course, he didn't know what was in the bag. He just knew that I was handing the bag and asking him to hold it while I was doing something else. And invariably, they would set it back down on the ground. And I'd say, no, it can't be on the ground. You have to hold it. And I would make them hold that 10 pounds. And I'd say, just hold it up here next to your stomach. That's easier. And they would hold it. And then when it was over, I would explain to them that you were just holding 10 pounds of fat. What do you think that would do if that were 90 more pounds in addition to that? Now do you see where that impacts your patient's health? Not only it inconveniences them, it's hard to carry around, but the cardiovascular, damage that can cause. So it was a way of impacting physicians either visually or, verbally or with information that would sway their opinions. And I was very effective at that. Very creative at doing that.
And that little anecdote about the 10 pounds of fat is to shed a sore light on your competitive drug.
Exactly.
Say, how could you prescribe this drug that has, such
well, it was actually Zyprexa that was causing the 100, pound weight gain. Mm-hmm. And that was what the Zyprexa rep had been, taught by management and marketing to go out and do, is to counter that with, that's not a big deal. Right. So what I had to do was create a visual in the mind of the physician to counter that, to say, but it is a big deal.
Okay. So what are some, maybe if you can come up with some other examples, because I think it is just really a strong use of terms, confessions. What other, what do you have to confess
I'll give you another example. I had a group, actually it was two physicians that were a father and son that were called no-see physicians. And what that means is they will not see pharmaceutical reps. So they were very influential in the community. And I had a new drug that was coming out, and I wanted to get these particular doctors to endorse this drug because they were on the pharmacy and therapeutics committee in the local hospital that I was responsible for. So the P&T committee is the one who determines what drugs can be written in the hospital. So I was trying to influence them. And in order to do that, since they didn't see reps, I told them that I was going to invite them and their spouses with the doctor that they referred their patients to most frequently, because these were both general practitioners, that was an endocrinologist. And so when they would refer to this particular specialist, I knew that he was on board with my product portfolio. So I needed to get him as their peer to influence these physicians. But since they wouldn't see me, I had to do it covertly. So what I did was I invited their referral doctor, who was the expert in endocrinology, to a dinner that I invited the two doctors and both of their spouses to. And I rented my own room in this 4-star Italian restaurant. I had my own waiters, and I had a violinist that came and played for us. That day in the afternoon, just to remind the doctors so that they would show up and they wouldn't forget about it, I sent a singing waiter with a bottle of champagne to each of their offices that would sing in Italian and deliver their bottle of champagne with their printed invitations. And they came, and that meal cost my company that evening, and that meal cost my company $2,000. But within the next year, those two gentlemen increased their prescribing of that new drug that I had launched over 25%, based on a 10-minute conversation that their peer had with them over dinner with their spouses.
And this $2,000 that was spent on this evening, I guess that's money that the pharmaceutical company gives you and says, here's your money that you get to spend.
Well, that would have been money that could have come directly out of my expense account at that time, but I actually had it buried under continuing education, because since I had another doctor there that was teaching or instructing those other two physicians in a round table environment, I could count that as continuing education. And therefore, that was written off not as a marketing venture, but as a continuing education expense.
And just, can you give us...
And I didn't do that of my own accord, by the way. That was what my district manager told me, where he told me to put the expense so that it would go through.
Okay. Can you give us any idea of, when you talk about your expense account, how, the money that you were allowed to spend, doing whatever it was for the doctors that you needed to do, catering lunches, whatever that may be.
Catering lunches, buying medical books, golf balls. I mean, of course, these things now aren't as overt. The industry doesn't do them as much as they used to back when I was in. But I mean, there were times when I was in Houston as a hospital rep, I took doctors to the Woodlands Player Tournament course, the golf course, and would take them into the golf pro shop and put my American Express credit card down and let them buy sweaters and balls and whatever they wanted to buy. And that was on my company's card.
And that was their gift from the pharmaceutical industry.
Exactly. But now that was, again, like I'm saying, that was back in the 80s and the 90s. I don't doubt that a lot of that stuff still goes on, but they have learned how to hide those expenses in ways that they aren't visible.
Well, and here is this perfect example of, your own, manager telling you to hide that expense, by filing this as continuing education, rather than a marketing expense. Can you give us any idea of how much money we're talking about that you were able to spend?
Back in the day, it depended on the company. It depended on the territory that I was in, but I generally had $2,000 to $3,000 a month to spend.
Wow.
And I never, ever, at any time that I can ever recall, was able to spend all of the money that I was given in an expense period. I was always finding that by the end of the quarter, I was struggling to try to spend all of my money because the managers would get angry with you because if you didn't spend all your money, then it wouldn't be given to you again the next quarter. And they wanted to make sure that we always had enough funds to do the things that we needed to do. And to be quite honest, I was so challenged when I got into a real sales position and I had to try to sell products on their merits that I was just almost lost. I was very well educated about what I was doing, but I never was tasked with selling my products based on their merits as a drug rep. It was on my personal relationships is how that I had to sell drugs.
And as you said at the very beginning of this interview, bribery. Which is the more you're talking about it.
That's what it is. I never went anywhere. I was a goody girl. I never went anywhere empty-handed. Never.
Wow.
If I didn't have scratch pads and pins and goodies and promo items to give away, I had candies and food, and I always had goods to give away.
Now, you mentioned earlier in the video the turning point of getting out of the industry, and we talked about that in our previous video. In closing for this video, what do you think is an important thing for people to know? You know, the way that we started this particular segment was about the prominence of pharmaceutical drug ads that are just everywhere. And these drug ads tell you, ask your doctor about this. If you're experiencing this, ask your doctor about that. And then what I'm hearing from you, based on what you're telling me, is that the information the doctors are receiving is coming from people who are told, show up with gifts, show up with this, here's all of this money for you to spend on these doctors that we are then going and placing our trust in and asking for advice and asking for their recommendations. These doctors are being bribed.
That's correct.
By the pharmaceutical industry, which is there to, so-called educate them and inform them. But as you just stated, when you actually got into a real sales position and had to sell something based on the merits of the product, that was just not at all something that you had learned how to do in the pharmaceutical industry. So what would you say to patients about how much we trust our doctors and looking to a doctor as a source of knowledge and information about these drugs and about mental health?
What I would really like to say is that people have to be proactive and do their own due diligence. In the age of information, ignorance is a choice. So I insist that people do their own due diligence. You are giving your power away to an authority figure if you take everything they tell you for face value and run with it. You are making yourself available to be victimized by profiteering corporations because they have an ulterior motive, and that is profit. And you need to be aware of that. So if someone is prescribing you a drug, then as a patient and as a consumer, it is your responsibility to get online and do a little homework. And you don't just put the name of the drug into Google or another search engine. You put the name of the drug, and then behind that you put in side effects and controversy. And you will open the can of worms that needs to be opened, because where there is smoke, trust me, there is fire in the pharmaceutical industry, because they are very proactive about shutting people up and putting the lid on things that are not true. They are very prolific in suing people. So if you find lots of information out on the web where people are screaming to their top of their lungs, which many patients do get on the web these days and tell their stories, then do some more investigating and find out, why are people screaming to the top of their lungs about this? And do not take the manufacturer's site for gospel, because the thing they need to worry about more than their doctors being bribed is their doctors being misinformed, because there is an ongoing dis and misinformation campaign taking place about pharmaceuticals. And if you're not aware of that and you make yourself available to these people, you will become victimized by that. So what I'm telling people, and what I insist on anyone who contacts me and asks me for my information, is to do your own homework. Don't allow people to talk over your head. Don't allow people to intimidate you. And when I say people, I mean physicians and other healthcare providers, because that is their MO. Their modus operandi is I'll talk over your head and therefore I'll intimidate you because you won't know what I'm talking about. And you'll do what I say because I'm the authority figure. Well, what I say is stop playing small. Own up to your own personal responsibility about your health. Do your own research, learn their language, and ask questions. If they aren't open to you to answer your questions and to let you partner in your own health care, find another doctor. You wouldn't go buy a new car by just going to one lot and shopping. Don't do it with your health care, where our lives are on the line, and you have to be responsible.
Thank you so much for your time today, Gwen.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Certainly. Thank you for joining us, and please be sure to join us again next time where we will be talking more about this topic. Again, if you would like to learn more about Gwen Olson, you can check out her website. You can also check out her books, Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher. Be sure to subscribe to the Psyche Truth channel and visit us at thetruthtalks.net. We look forward to seeing you again next time.